next.
Thank you, Manny. We appreciate that. And if I can follow up with just a few points, what I found interesting more recently is at least 2 polls, as best I could tell, suggesting that a large majority of the American people still do not have an opinion on Judge Sotomayor. They don't know who she is. I mean, we assume here in Washington everyone follows everything that goes on and as closely as we do. American people do not follow this issue as closely as we might think, and they only follow it once confirmation hearings begin, if at all. So to me, there's an opportunity, not only in terms of the education aspects, in terms of the divide between those who want to remake the Constitution and those who want to protect it, but actually whether or not she's confirmed. The second issue is, and I think goes to Roger's point, it's not so much what she did on the appellate court that is, I think, an indication of what she'll do on the Supreme Court, what she did beforehand, her activism. And we released a report, Senator Sessions echoed some points related to it, on her tenure at the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, a radical far-left organization that uses the courts to advance a race-conscious agenda, to be clear, among other things. And our pro-life friends, the Americans United for Life, have pointed out that they've taken radical positions, really retrograde positions on the abortion right that are so behind the times now that they ought to be embarrassing to Judge Sotomayor. So it's an indication of just how radical she is to look at her tenure at the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, and it ought to be a focus. And other folks have been focusing more recently on her stance on international law. She's an activist on international law. She's made several speeches suggesting that, we should listen to good ideas no matter where they come from, Iran, Belgium, France, no matter what. Do you want a judge on the Supreme Court, a justice on the Supreme Court, who's willing to look outside the Constitution to traditions and texts that may be inimical to our values, or to come to the result that she wants? And that's another point. She's a results-oriented jurist. This whole legal realism philosophy that she had been proposing, which is incoherent in some ways, but suggests that she'll just, she'll say anything in the sense of to get to the outcome she desires, and including bringing in international law. And going earlier to Curt's point, you would think that they would have gotten some of the key points right. You would think that the temperament wouldn't have been an issue. So it's surprising to me. And as I looked more into her record and even the basic qualifications, I assumed, and I took the president's word for her, that she was an intellectual giant. She was smart in college and had done well in college. But by her own admission, she did not do well on standardized tests, and she blamed it on cultural bias. By her own admission, she was a product, frankly, of the affirmative action movement in the 70s. And so her rise is not necessarily one based on merit by her own admission. And I think that's, however uncomfortable it is for folks to raise it, it needs to be raised. She's not the highly qualified jurist that is being sold. She may be a perfectly good judge, and I'm sure she works diligently to come up with, on the court, and I understand she's a wonderful person probably in person, but that's not the standard. This is not the best that Obama could have done, even given his weak standards in terms of philosophy. So, I think there are, this is a woefully deficient nomination on a number of fronts, and she should not have gotten out of the box given some of her qualifications and the issues in terms of her behavior on the bench. It's clear to me in the end. What it concerns me, Manny, and maybe you can address this initially, is that, as soon as the nominee is announced, it seems to me that too many Republicans and conservatives plan to lose as opposed to planning to win. They looked at the numbers, on the Judiciary Committee, by the way, for those of you who don't know, it's 12 Democrats, 7 Republicans. And I guess the 7 remaining Republicans are pretty good, but it's a terribly, the hearings won't be as good as they might have been if the numbers were closer. What strikes me is that, and we're a nonpartisan organization party-wise, the lack of leadership on this. I think this is a crisis. I mean, we have a president of the United States who has put forward a lawless standard for judicial decision-making, and and you know, presumably his nominees ought to be really be given strict scrutiny. And I don't see that attitude, or I didn't see that attitude initially out of the box, which I think would have been appropriate. I would have thought, you know, frankly, I think it's appropriate to oppose the nomination out of the box, given the fact that he continues to push forward this criteria for his judicial nominations. And I didn't see the leadership. I'm beginning to see more of it now. But, you know, 2 weeks before a hearing is a little late in the game, in my view.
Yeah, you know, and there's something to what you just said in that this is a president who altered the presidential standard. This is a momentous nomination because the president did that. You know, again, George Washington was asked who will he nominate to the Supreme Court, and he said people of high character who show judiciousness, the opposite of bias, and who support the new Constitution, which was quite controversial at the time as a comment. 3, that's the standard. This president has repudiated that standard, particularly the judiciousness standard. He has indicated, he signaled that he would nominate a judge and pick a judge who displayed the possibility that they would apply empathy and personal bias. So I agree that from the very beginning, senators had an opportunity that was lost in the very beginning. I argued early on that we shouldn't focus so much on her record at the beginning, because that will come out in the hearings, and you know, you get into it. We all sort of read the stuff, but really the issue is the president's standard. That was the phenomenal moment that they should have all responded to, that he had altered that standard, signaled the kind of person he was going to nominate. It was really very significant. I think we're in a crisis moment, but I'm a little bit of a partisan in this, but also from an American point of view, I think Democrats and Republicans, to put it that way, Democrats and Republicans should begin to treat the confirmation process in a much more serious way, and not just going through the kabuki dance that we will now see over the next month, but in a much more serious way, because they have an obligation to remind the American people that they're the ultimate stewards when they vote. When Justice Byron White was nominated, he went up to a hearing that lasted 15 minutes, and he took all 3 questions, which goes to show that at the moment the American people were slumbering. And as a consequence, what has happened is that they have been stripped of rights and other rights and powers created and so on while we slumbered. And so the Senate has a duty to rise to this debate. Republicans, I think Democrats actually get it more than Republicans in this, because they understand that this actually is very good for their fundraising. There's an asymmetry here. It isn't very useful with regard to fundraising on the right, and therefore Republicans are not as alert to this issue, because they get the impression that folks aren't really worked up about it. They get that impression because they are not worked up about it, and they're the ones that can spark the fire. And it has been an enormous effort to get Republicans to understand that they have to spark the fire, in part because, and this is I won't get into this too much. I won't get into this at all, but I'll say this. You see, Democrats on the left function differently. When the Democrats ask the outside groups to invest, because it takes a lot of money to actually get involved in an issue. It takes resources and staff and interns and this, that, and the other thing. But when you are asked to invest in an issue, we need your help and get this out to the American people. What the Democrat groups understand is that they will have time for the payback. That is to say, they will recover their costs.